Hello S3 and welcome to week 4 of Historical Fiction Creative Writing. This week we're going to have a look at setting and how to use language for effect. The part of the marking tag that we'll be focusing on this week is the I can statement that says I can use effective description, and in the bracket there is sensory description, focusing on key objects or details, and imagery to build a particular mood and atmosphere for my reader. I've tried to make the structure for this week similar to last week when we were focusing on character. So I'm providing you with 4 different techniques. I'm going to give you some examples and explanations of those techniques. And then I really want you to have a go at playing around with and practicing these techniques in some sample pieces of writing this week before you apply them to your own piece of creative writing. Just a reminder at the bottom here of the 2 conventions that will be relevant to our work this week as well, which is world building and setting, and how important details of costume, furniture, housing, all of those really simple things are when we're writing historical fiction, because we are transporting our reader into a time that is not familiar to them. The first technique that I'm going to talk you through this week is broad to narrow description. You might have heard me or another teacher talking about zooming in to your description. It's effective because a lot of people struggle with how to begin, how to just start their story. And I really like it because instead of pulling your reader in too quickly and kind of shocking them with the character or the place that they're going to be spending their time in, you bring them there gradually, and that gives you some breathing space so that you can describe some of the more interesting details that will be important when building this historical world. So there's an example here that I want you to read through. I've color coded it so that you can kind of see the steps along our journey. And I've made a note at the side as well that if you're writing in first person, you imagine yourself walking towards the focus of your story. If you're writing in third person, it might be helpful to imagine that you are behind the lens of a camera. So you're not the character walking towards the big event or the main character of your story, but you are showing your reader step by step the world that you are creating. The second technique we're going to work with this week is pathetic fallacy. It sounds a bit fancy, but it is a really helpful, straightforward way of building mood and atmosphere in your story. It's the use of natural elements to reflect the mood, the emotions, the atmosphere of your characters. Weather is the most commonly used technique, I think, when we're thinking about pathetic fallacy. But it's really important to remember that animals can be super useful as well. So it's any element of nature that you can use for this one. It doesn't need to be restricted to weather. In the first description I provided you with on the last slide, there were 2 examples of pathetic fallacy at play. In the first sentence, I started with the sky swirled with dark clouds. And then further on in the story, as she's approaching the centre of town and the witch, rain began to fall. Both of these were used to contribute to the ominous, sinister mood of the story, and they also foreshadowed some of the violence that's to come. What I'd like you to spend some time now on is reading through the descriptions listed at the bottom here, A to E, and just write down what mood you think is created by each of these descriptions. Technique number 3 for this week is 5 senses description. Another really straightforward one, but it's important to remember it in order to craft a thoughtful piece of writing and not to just fall back on what our characters or what we, the writer, want the audience to see. Have a look through the original description and you'll see that I've managed to use sound, sight and smell, but so far haven't included any explicit references to touch or to taste. So your task here to remind you of how we use the five senses, which is something you should be fairly familiar with by now through personal writing that you've done and creative writing that you've done in other years. I want you to upgrade this original description so that it also includes touch and taste. This upgrade should take no longer than 5 or 10 minutes. For the final technique this week, I just want to remind you of the importance of imagery in your writing. It doesn't need to be overly complicated, but remembering that simile and metaphor are really helpful when pulling your reader into a world that is unknown to them. You want to use something your reader is familiar with when making the comparison so that they can understand the world you are trying to build. I've included a couple of examples at the bottom here. You can see how straightforward and simple they sound, but I would much prefer to see in your work that you are giving these a go, even if they seem childish or simple to you, because it shows me that you are trying to be thoughtful when crafting your descriptions. So when you're writing this week, have a play around and a try at some similes and metaphors. The final task for this week is to bring together the 4 different techniques that can help us to develop setting. There are 2 options here, depending on how confident you feel with writing about setting and with using these 4 techniques so far. Option 1 is to use my original description for a redraft task. Scrap what you don't like, keep what you really like, and make sure that you are using the 4 techniques that we have covered in these slides. Option 2 is a little bit more independent. I've provided some image prompts. Use those to write an original description using the 4 techniques we have covered this week. The challenge on this slide is to apply these descriptive techniques to your own writing and to produce 1 paragraph of setting description for your story. Remember that the more notes you have, whether they are in mind map form or paragraph form, the easier it will be to string them all together for the final story you are going to write. A final reminder from me then, just to keep in touch. If you need help at any point this week, you want some support with your work, or just a quick bit of advice, email or tweet me as you are working. At the end of the week, please send your 1 paragraph description my way so that I can see how you have managed to apply these techniques to your work. Take care, stay safe, and do what you can. And another reminder, you are allowed to get in touch with me through the week. You do not need to wait until you've finished all of your work.